What's going on, guys? This is Rob. We are back with X-Men Red and the Genesis War and Storm. Jesus, Storm, dude, the ending of this is crazy. Okay, so before we get to the Storm portion, we do have to cover this first tidbit. And this is the return of Gabriel Summers, also known as Vulcan. Not only is it the return of Gabriel Summers as Vulcan, he's back to his full power. Now, for those guys who don't know what that means, Gabriel Summers is an Omega level mutant. This guy can manipulate and control any form of energy in existence. It doesn't matter what it is, cosmic energy, right? This guy is one Marvel writer away from being able to alter reality on a universal scale. And given how his powers work, it's entirely possible. But Gabriel Summers has been brought back by Apocalypse. Now, in the last video that we did, we talked about how Apocalypse had gone and rescued Sunfire, who was kind of like one of the mutant variants or kind of equivalents to Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four, right? Sunfire and Sunspot are actually almost identical in terms of power, just varying degrees of how hot they can get. No pun intended. But the thing about this is that when Gabriel Summers is brought back by Apocalypse and his full powers are restored, the question he asked is, am I to be your death? Now, this is not him asking the question, am I to be the one that kills you? Anybody who's familiar with Apocalypse knows he has his four horsemen, right? War, pestilence, famine, and death. That's his thing. Whenever he brings mutants into his service, or even non-mutants into his service, he grants them the title of one of his four horsemen. That's the question Gabriel Summers is asking. Am I to be your horseman death? Well, the cool thing is Apocalypse says, no, Gabriel Summers, you are not on any level. In times past, I ordained my chosen warriors with the names of those I had lost and wrote their names in blood in the sacred texts of humankind. But now is a time for older concepts. Had my family understood my path, this would be a simple matter, but it is happening as it must. It is happening now, and I do not need a new death. So he's planning something entirely new. What he's, the ending of this is absolutely crazy. What he's planning here is mind-blowing, right? It's awesome, right? So he says, I need the fire to be fire. I need you to be you. Now, here's the difference between someone like Apocalypse and someone like Gabriel Summers. Is Gabriel Summers powerful? Yes. Is Gabriel Summers as powerful as Apocalypse? No. And the reason why is because Apocalypse immediately says, but fire is only useful when harnessed, so you will remain bound to me and bound to my will. Obligation is a useful ingredient in the old magics, and their confines will teach you restraint. He immediately harnesses this guy's power, right? Like basically your ability to use your powers is relative to whether or not I choose to allow you to use them on me. That's it. You can attack anybody but me. He overrides the ability of Gabriel Summers to use his abilities to attack Apocalypse. That's the kind of power he possesses. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out here, and this is especially prominent with what Jonathan Hickman is doing right now with the Gods comic that he's covering, but also a lot of the old stuff. When it comes to magic in Marvel Comics, this is a universal concept that most anybody can tap into if they can somehow harness the fortitude to do it. Not everybody can. And 9 times out of 10, people who practice quote unquote magic in Marvel are either people who are using things like sleight of hand and deception, or if they are using genuine magic, they're only using a very low level form of it. It's the reason why you don't have like 100,000 Doctor Stranges running around the Marvel universe. Not everyone can attain power on that scale because they simply just don't have the aptitude for it. But Apocalypse has been around for an incredibly long time. Thousands of years. And so while his ability to harness magic is nowhere near the same level as Stephen Strange, it is on a level to where he can use old magic and even new magic for a variety of different purposes. That's one of the things that makes Apocalypse so incredibly powerful. This guy, just by virtue of the abilities that he has, right? He can grow and shrink to any size. He can give himself any superhuman power. He's immortal, right? All that kind of stuff. He's not indestructible, but assuming that you can't destroy his physical form, he will just live forever. right? Like the ability to harness and practice magic. That's something that he's been doing for a very long time. That's not new. It's just an aspect of his abilities that you don't see very often. But what you have here is when Gabriel Summers is brought back to the other people that Apocalypse has gathered, right? The demon that he brought with him from the realm of Arakko, right? The other dimension where he'd resided for quite some time, along with Sunfire. Their question is, so what's the point here, right? Like, what's the deal with all of this, right? Because Apocalypse starts talking in his like ceremonial talk, right? Like, yes, the oubliettes you strained against for months, which you well deserve, destroyer of worlds. I tore easily with bare hands. Like just the Apocalypse speak, right? You know, like, I mean, usually it's cool when he's spitting out one-liners, you know, like, I am the rocks on the eternal shore, crash against me and be broken, you know, like that kind of thing. That's cool. But Sunfire is just like not having it, right? So he's like, let's skip the what ifs, man. Like, we're here now, and what is this that we're seeing going on? You need magical elements, fire, earth, air, water. What's the point of all of this? And so it's one of these things where when Sunfire brings up the point and saying, I'm guessing that like storm's the air in whatever it is that you're doing, the response of Apocalypse is no. Storm is not a mere ingredient in this magic. Aurora is the magic. And so that's the crazy thing, because at that point, you transition over to Storm. Now, here's the thing. As those of you guys who know from following our coverage of X-Men Red so far, Storm has been contending with the Uranos trigger, right? A little bit of a reminder here for those of you guys who forgot. Uranos is just a ridiculously powerful Eternal. The deal that was struck between the Eternals and the X-Men following the Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals Judgment Day event is that because Uranos was released by the Eternals on Mars, where a huge portion of mutants resided, and that within the span of 1 hour, he had eradicated pretty much 99% of all mutants on the planet, that the Uranos trigger would allow the mutant population to release Uranos for their own accord if they needed to. Storm's been contending with this. It was presented to her, right? Like, this is an option available to you. And that's where Uranos asked the question, what will your decision be? Which massacre will you choose? Whatever your answer, it is on your head. You have company, by the way, because Uranos is able to kind of read her mind and see what's going on around her. But make no mistake, right? Uranos is he's the old Eternals, not the new ones, not Icarus, right? Not any of those guys who were just like, capable. He's the old Eternals, right? Like OG, double OG, ridiculously overpowered. Like Uranos versus Thanos, right? Thanos would get those cheeks clapped and it wouldn't even be close. And so Storm, pondering over this whole thing, John Ironfire, right? Kind of like her number 2, right? Her top general comes to her and says, you need to release Uranos. If you do that, he will end this Genesis war immediately, right? He will end this whole thing right now. But Storm chooses not to, right? She says no, right? When John says someone has to end it, and if you're not strong enough, I will, Storm destroys the Uranos trigger. And that's when Uranos' last words to her are, your choice. I hope you don't regret it. And so John just kind of freaks out. And he's like, what have you done, right? Like, that was the end of the war. That was our victory. And Storm's response is, that was genocide, right? And his answer is, it was mercy, right? It was the innocence under annihilation spell, or all the innocence here. Genesis is coming, Aurora. Do you know who she is? Because I do. I lived alongside her in a paradise of art and freedom and love, and she feared it. The 100 fought to make Okara whole again. She fought to break it apart further. And if you think Annihilation is using her somehow, I tell you that she is using it, planting her damned whispers in the minds of anyone she thinks is useful, no matter what they believed before. And the response of Storm here, this is incredibly important here, right? She says, and how is that different from your general? Once he commanded you, are you beholden to his whims now? Now she's responding and talking about the White Sword, right? For those of you guys who don't remember that guy, because we haven't talked about him for a long time, the White Sword and his 100, the White Sword has the ability to heal himself and anybody else, and even resurrect himself and anybody else from the dead. That's why him and his soldiers are called the 100, and that's why they're the most feared forces in seemingly all of creation, because fighting against an enemy that can never truly die is an enemy that you can never truly defeat. And so that's where things get really cool, because in turn, you basically have Robert DaCosta who comes along and basically tells Storm, you could stop him, you know, and she says, not without killing him, because Ironfire is a believer. Right? He is a true believer. And so what happens is, of course, Storm is basically taken before Richard Rider Nova. Because again, in the last video, we talked about how Richard Rider is kind of a liaison for the mutant population with regards to like the other empires that exist out there in the universe. But he had basically taken an arrow from Pestilence in order to keep Storm from dying, right? But again, Pestilence representing plague, it's spreading throughout Richard Rider's body. And so the world mind of the Nova Corps is keeping him alive using its power and trying to fight off the infection, but there's seemingly no real way to do it. And the cool thing about this is that in this conversation that Storm and Robert DaCosta have, right? Like Robert DaCosta says he didn't take that arrow so you could press some kill a million mutants button. And the response to Storm is, no, he didn't. Richard Rider knew that there would be no button. Right? This is the kicker to this. This is what Storm means. When she says this, what she's basically saying is, sure, Uranos could have come here. He could have ended the war by eradicating the entirety of Genesis forces, thereby ending the Genesis War. But the reality here is that if all I wanted to do was lay waste to an entire world, raze it to the ground, and annihilate her forces, I would have done that already. I would have already done that. That's what Storm is saying. And that's why I love the way that Al Ewing is handling her forces, because it's true. I love the way that Al Ewing is handling Storm. People don't, like, that's the thing, man. Like, I feel like a lot of people who are familiar with Storm don't really understand the nature of Storm in Marvel Comics. They're starting to get it now, man, because Storm, this girl is a wrecking machine, right? This girl is death incarnate. Like this chick, right? Being able to command an entire, like, weather system. I mean, if this was really Storm wanting to eradicate the forces of Genesis, she would summon endless tornadoes, lightning storms that would stretch the entirety of the planet, that would superheat the entirety of the atmosphere, right? That would literally just turn the entire world into an uninhabitable grave. That's what she would do. This is a woman with the power to kill a world. That's what Storm has the ability to do. And that's why it's so cool, because at that moment, Apocalypse shows up. Now, this is the cool thing. When Apocalypse emerges here, you immediately have the conversation between himself and Storm, because for the most part, the last time Storm saw Apocalypse was at the conclusion of 10 of Swords event, when we learn that before there was the island of Krakoa and there was the island of Arakko out in this other dimension, that they were once a singular island called Okara, and that the island had to basically be separated to stop the demonic forces of annihilation from invading the rest of all of creation, right? In order to ensure that the portal, like the rift, could be closed, that these two realms could basically live in peace, right? They could live separate from each other, that those who chose to stay in the dimension of Arakko could choose to stay there, and those who chose to stay within the earthly dimension could choose to be there as well. Apocalypse went to Arakko. He went to this other dimension. But when Genesis made her move, left the Arakko dimension, and then invaded Mars with the intention of taking over the entirety of the mutant population within the main Marvel universe on Earth and on Mars, that's when Apocalypse has been making his return. The response that he gives Storm here, right, when she says, you don't stand with Genesis, his answer is, I will not stand against her, but neither will I stand aside her. This world needs and deserves more than she offers. It needs magic. It needs you. Apocalypse is still playing both sides, right? Survival of the fittest, that only those who are strong enough deserve to survive. And so that's why what he's doing here is he's saying, if this is going to be a fight between you and Genesis represents the dimension of Arakko, and you represent the dimension of Krakoa, then you guys should fight as such. And so as the two of them are talking, Apocalypse makes the recognition and saying, Uranos stays in his bottle, which is disappointing because I kind of wanted to see Apocalypse fight Uranos, to be honest with you guys, right? And of course, Storm says he offered the illusion of clean hands, the lie that I could summon evil and not claim it. The blood on my hands I accept, but they must be my hands. And at least I know when to stop, right? The response of Apocalypse is yes, that's what we tell ourselves, right? It's really kind of him saying the smart move would have been to unleash Uranos on Mars. That would have been the smart move, because the lie that you're telling yourself is that you would have been able to stop. that if you just let your powers run loose, right, you bring fire from the gods down to the surface of Mars and you eradicate all of Genesis' forces, that you would be able to simply just stop there, right? Once the last of her forces were destroyed, you'd be able to relinquish all of this power, right? Or at least everything that you've done, kind of sit down, take a deep sigh and say, we won, yay, celebrate, right? Like the end of Return of the Jedi. No, the reality is that you would get carried away with it. You would get carried away with the power that you have, and you would become the darkest version of yourself, which really kind of begs the question, what would happen if Storm turned evil? Which I kind of want to see, right? But Apocalypse says, I offer a different choice, but no illusions. The forces of Genesis are coming for your people, perhaps even now. And her response is, then I trust my people, and in this, I trust you. And Apocalypse makes this amazing response. He says, trust can be a liar. I trusted that my children would one day stand at the 4 points of this X, but they have not learned what they needed to learn. Death shows some promise, but pestilence is lost, right? Dead, basically. And the rest are not suitable. So I must work with those whom fate has provided. And so that's when Sunfire makes his presence known. And that's when Apocalypse brings everybody together. Now, here's a cool thing about Vulcan, right? Gabriel Summers, here's a cool thing about him, right? Like, once he sees Storm, he immediately freaks, right? Like, you imprisoned me here, buried me alive under solid rock. The response to Storm is, only Krakoa gave you amnesty, Gabriel. The billions dead at your hands would call what we did mercy. Now, there's a couple things that she's referencing here. One is the role he played in the events of Judgment Day. But the bigger role that she's talking about here is the old Gabriel Summers. Gabriel Summers when he was Vulcan. That's what she's talking about here. That's what she means when she says, Krakoa gave you amnesty. For those of you guys who don't know the history of Gabriel and the full power that he possesses, in a story called X-Men Deadly Genesis, as well as the rise and fall of the Shi'ar Empire story arc, that Vulcan had basically returned after having believed to have been dead. He was actually saved by Darwin, who was a mutant. But the point is that he had returned and he had believed that he had either been replaced, lied to, what have you. But when he was given his actual origin, that his mother was killed at the hands of Daken of the Shi'ar Empire, he immediately set out, right? Like him taking off to the Shi'ar Empire, that was in the rise and fall of the Shi'ar Empire. He conquered the entirety of it and then went to war with the Inhumans in War of Kings, right? So like waged a war against the universe itself. Countless billions were dead at his hands, right? Like the guy was just this crazy fanatical warlord. It was amazing. Like, it was just one of the coolest moments ever in the history of his character. That's what she's referencing here. And so that's why he says, once I'm free of this blue freak, I'll make those billions seem like fractions. That's my mercy, which is true because he could, right? Like he could eradicate everybody on Earth in one fell swoop. He simply just chooses not to. But Apocalypse responds and he says, and everything that has died will live. Stand in the center, Aurora. And that's when he casts the magic, right? He says Genesis' first act in this war was to return what had seemed dead, the living island Arakko. To win this war, you must answer that act like for like. This is the mutant magic, the highest mutant technology. Let the fire be fire. Let the air be free. Let the earth support the people, and let water reshape this world. You are what brings us together. You are the weather, the play of the breeze, and the fall of the rain. You are the storm. You are the breath of life, and the breath of life is in you. And so as you live, so does the land. Now let the living land be born, right? And so what you do is you switch over to Genesis, right? Basically alongside Sobanar, right? Who's kind of like this mutant that has the ability to communicate with water and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't really matter. The point is that as they're having this conversation, Genesis is kind of relishing in the fact that they've pushed the forces of Storm back, right? That victory is near. It's on the horizon. It's right there. But right there and what's on the horizon is also something else, because Sobanar tells her something is waiting through my blood, through the ocean towards us. I can feel it. It's big enough for me to feel it. And when her response is what? He says, I can feel it here. Look, points out there, and it's just this gigantic island, right? The rest is here, and it walks like a mutant. Behold, Koarok, this literal gigantic landmass. Through Storm, a massive island has been created, and it's operating at Storm's entire whim, which really begs the question, what response could Genesis possibly have for this, right? Like, it's crazy, because Storm says, Genesis, you claim to speak for Arakko, then raise your island and fight. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. I am excited to see where this goes, and I will catch you all later. Peace.